May through July is when bass can be shallow, deep, and everywhere in between. And that's why so many anglers waste the day. Jordan Lee shares the 5 baits he trusts to narrow it down fast, plus a winning frog tweak at the end that most guys don't know. On today's Catch More Bass, presented by Miller Tech. All right, Jordan Lee, welcome in. Man, it's going to be that time of year. You know, spring is awesome for a big fish, but this is probably the best time of the year to just go. We're kind of talking late spring through early summer, that May, June, July time. And you're the perfect person to talk about it. You know, you've won 2 championships. You've won the big tournaments. You won the Classic twice, back-to-back years. One of the few guys to do that. You can catch numbers on the VPT. You've been an Angler of the Year there. Every fish counts. And you can catch big fish, too. You're a 2-time heavy hitters champ on MLF as well. You know, this year you're off to a quick start. 4 tournaments. You have 2 top 10s, a 15th. You were 8th in the Classic. I think not even most of the guys were scoping. You were old school cranking out there, if I saw right. So you can scope them. You can Classic fish, win the big ones. So excited to have you in here and talk about fishing in the early summer.
Yeah, man. Yeah, thanks for having me. I talked to you right before the show. This is a great podcast. I love watching, love hearing all the guys' stories. It's just cool to hear. And that's what we all love fishing. So it's, even somebody like me that, does it full time, caught a lot of bass, won some tournaments. I still love to hear the stories and, hear what guys have to say because everybody fishes different. And that's kind of the beauty of it. But yeah, we're coming up on, post spawn, like you said, May, June, July. May is probably, I would say, it's one of my favorites. It's probably my favorite month to bass fish, um, just because you don't have usually those cold fronts. The weather's kind of stabled out. The fish have and most of them have done spawning. They're quit thinking about that. So it's just a good time to be fishing.
Yeah, and I guess it's kind of a dual-edged sword, and what we're going to talk about tonight are your top baits, what patterns you do, and this is what you do every time. I mean, you're getting ready to go out in another tournament, you rig up stuff and take an educated guess,
Hmm.
but it's kind of, to me, it's a dual-edged sword because you can kind of fish anything. I mean, it's from shallow to deep, so anything in your tackle box will work, but at the same time, you have to check possibly everything. So when you go into a lake, are you pretty much you're going to run around and try to find exactly what the best pattern is, or is it like, man, I'm best with a frog and flipping and say a Neko rig, and I'm going to make these 3 work?
Yeah, that's probably the toughest thing, my toughest decision going in a tournament because I grew up, fishing Gunnersville where you got the grass, you got the ledges, kind of like back Kentucky Lake, like you had the ledge fish, so you knew how to, do the ledge fish and then but you also, love to power fish shallow. And so like when we go to those tournaments like we're going to this year, like at Santee Cooper. I haven't fished a tournament there before. One of the only ones, but like that time of year in May, like you said, it can be all of it. And I think those tournaments I've done well in a lot of those events, but there's a lot of times where you spread yourself out, right? And I'm not like that John Cox guy where he's like, I'm going to put these 3, baits in my hand and I'm going to do this all day and it's going to work out for him because, you know, he's really concentrated on that. It doesn't get spread out. I'm the kind of guy, if I don't watch it and if I'm not careful in a tournament, I'll get spread out. I'll have 25-foot diving crankbaits. I'll have frogs. I've had it all on my deck, and I'll start with one thing, I'll do another, and sometimes it works. Sometimes that game plan can work in a tournament, but I love it all. Like, I love the big crankbaits, 25 plus footers, as big as your arm, but also, man, the frog, the shallow water, like I've really over my career and the last, I'd say since live scope really came out, like I didn't really jump on that bandwagon um as much as a lot of guys, and I've kind of just almost fell back to my old ways more and more where there may be less pressure, on the bank. You see, like we talked about John, I'm not to his level, I'll still slide out there, but I do think for me personally, like I love to fish that way. The frog, one of the heavy hitters on that. My last couple tournaments have been that, in that May time frame, and I've done a little bit of everything. But it's just a fun time to fish too, and but I do catch myself a lot of times like, man, I don't know, should I go deep? Should I go shallow? Nah, I'm gonna go shallow.
And do you have, like, when you're kind of evaluating, is it are you looking at what everybody else is doing and trying to make an educated guess where it's like, I think more guys are going to do this, so you're trying to get away from the best patterns, or how does fishing pressure weigh into it?
Well, yeah, and I was thinking when you said that, I was thinking back to one of the tournaments that I won at Kissimmee, a heavy hitters tournament, and it was right before some of the guys had the live scope. I didn't have it, but I remember that tournament. Um, I was catching some fish in the grass there on Toho, and there was guys fishing the grass, but it was like kind of a perfect scenario for me in practice. We only had 2 days of practice, and I knew I could catch some fish, but I knew it wasn't going to be like the deal. And I happened to find a brush pile pretty quick in practice, like, and I caught a couple big fish out of it. It clued me in, and if you can really get a hint quick, like I knew, an area, and I knew like a predominant pattern, was good. It was going to play. The grass was going to play, but in the back of my mind, I knew there was going to be a lot too many people fishing it. I knew it wasn't like just great. So when I found that, I was like, oh, this is something that a lot of guys aren't. I'm not seeing any boats out here. Um, you know, this was like kind of the perfect scenario, and I found a bunch of brush piles quick. And so that really honed me into offshore bite instead of sucking into, what everybody else is doing. And you see that a lot with guys winning big tournaments where there's a lot of guys, in good areas catching fish. And then there's always going to be something else, there's always going to be an overlooked spot, um, a pattern that may not, get as many bites. And I saw that last tournament, the Tom Bigby, like there was a creek that was just full of fish. You could get a lot of bites. I found that, but I knew like, okay, there's going to be a lot of boats in here, and I didn't really spend a whole lot of time in there in the tournament. And that kind of hurt me, and it helped me at the same time because I was fishing different places that there weren't as many fish and not as many bites, but the quality happened to be a little bit better. So you got to play all those odds. Like that tournament fishing, man, it's like the decisions and the kind of the overlooking, and or not overlooking, but looking at the big picture and seeing where, there's going to be, maybe thinking about the pressure, like that's a huge deal, in the top level tournaments, like, because everybody finds the same fish, typically.
Yeah, and we used to all be in the same areas too. That's, to me, that's like the biggest change with live scope. Where up until what, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, it was, since either one of us started, every Bassmaster said in the spring they're all shallow. Then come May 1st, they all go deep, and then in the fall they all go into the back of the creeks, and then December 1st they all go deep.
Yeah.
And now it's like, man, like March 15th or July 15th. There, I mean, there's fish all over, suspended, high, low, 10 feet of water, 30 feet of water. It's crazy.
Yeah, and it can be hard to decipher, like, narrow down on all these different lakes, like what exactly you want to do that week. But you do have to really kind of know as an angler, like I knew going into like the classic, I was going to try the live scope deal, but I knew that I wasn't probably going to win the tournament. Like it just didn't set up great for me. But I knew that was going to be a predominant player. Guys were going to catch him, but I fell back, my old ways, and there wasn't anybody doing it, and the bite wasn't great, but I just really pushed it hard and grinded hard and came out with a good finish there. But yeah, there's fish all over the place, right? Like you said, I mean, you go to I mean, we used to think, April, like, oh, they're all going to be on beds. We're going to be sight fishing every tournament. And you look back, and there's all guys out in the middle catching them, and you're like, what? I thought they were supposed to be up here. So you're right. Like, it's just, these lakes, these fish do all different kinds of things, all different patterns, and so many fish behind you. Like, usually when I miss a bite and I really, really miss it, like the fish are, they're behind me. They're out there deeper. I'm pushing it too hard. Like, oh, this is what they're going to do. That bit me at Gunnersville this year, where learning from mistakes is something I've always tried to do, like in tournament fishing, and I knew better, but I really tried to force. I knew they were going to bite a trap. They're going to bite a trap. It's February. It's Gunnersville. I've caught a bunch of fish, and guess what? The fish were all the fish really. I wasn't around any fish. They were behind me. They were out deeper. They were on the main river. They were suspended, and so you can just easily miss that. Or I do.
Well, we're about 10 minutes in, and basically all we've done so far is convince everybody how confusing it is on the lakes. And it's a good thing. They're a little bit everywhere, but that's why we brought you in, because obviously there's a few patterns that work.
For
And I
sure.
think you have some lanes that help to figure out, okay, yes, they're deep. Yes, they're shallow. And then from there, I think you're pretty good at figuring out, like, ooh, I got a frog bite. Well, I know a couple other things might work. So
Yeah.
let's
And
dive in.
May, is probably one of my favorite times to throw a frog. For a couple different reasons. You like with the post-spawn fish, um, the tournament I won at the heavy hitters tournament there in Toho. It was like the perfect situation, like dream come true type bite. But won it on this bait right here, the Swamp Lord, and you know May is like, I'm thinking about my schedule going forward too, like going to Santee Cooper and different places, and it's just a big fish bait. And you got two different options with your frog. I say two different. You got a lot of different options, but the two options that I choose: popping frog and just your regular walking frog. And this is the popping swamp lord. Um, and that's a big question that you always hear, like, man, when do you throw the regular frog, when you throw the popping frog. And May is a great time to throw a popping frog, especially if there's not like a lot of matted heavy grass, which it Toho that one year there just happened to be. And I was throwing the regular one, but I would say probably 70% of the time I'm going to go with the popping frog post spawn. Fish start to get on bluegill. They're garden fried. It's just a big fish bait. Like early in the morning, especially like that low light. It doesn't matter if you're in Florida or you're in Tennessee or wherever. It always seems like that Alabama, the first couple hours of daylight, you're going to have a window there for like a pretty good topwater bite in May typically. So yeah, the popping swamp lord, like I'll trim the legs down a little bit, where it's not like a giant. This is just a standard one, and I'll always do that on all my frogs, um, just for the simple fact is, I always think a fish coming up and grabbing the tails, and just you don't get a good hook. It's just a little bit smaller profile, still a pretty good profile frog, but I love this popping frog. Like, to me, it's probably one of the best out there, just because it's so soft and it's got good hooks in it. You can throw it in the nasty stuff too. But yeah, popping frog, colors I'm always fairly simple on: white, black, green pumpkin. But I still have all the crazy colors for some reason because I love frogs. And I love fishing tackle in general. But yeah, 65 to, or 50-pound braid, typically 50 X5. Berkeley braid's what I go with just because I can cast it a little bit better. I used to throw 65 religiously. And started going down to 50, and I really like the way it casts. But skip it back under, trees. That gets a little bit trickier, tougher cast. But man, I'm thinking back to like all the tournaments, especially like MLF. People think MLF, is like numbers, and I'm going back and think I'm like, man, I threw a frog more MLF than I did now. Fishing for five. Um, but a lot of tournaments like Texas. I remember Lake Palestine skipping a frog back under some trees, and they were just, it was the bait for me. Was catching some big fish on it. Kissimmee. It's just like, um, man, they love a frog in May. So I'm gonna feed it to them, and it's definitely a go to.
Yes.
One thing that I've experimented with, and I wanted to show this on because there's always good tackle juice on here, and I'm always tinkering. Like I said, I love frogs, but this one right here, I actually took the skirt off. A couple years ago, I was just playing with this and put like this Flashaboo on it, and I saw this like first. Probably somebody did it, maybe at Okeechobee. I was like, man, that's cool. I need to figure out how to do that. So I started yanking the skirts off my frogs, and this is just a bluegill color right here, and then I would get a needle basically and just tie some braid around it and pull it through. And I think this is pretty cool. I've definitely caught some good fish on this. And you may think like what's the difference, but that little extra flash, like I think times when it's just laying there on the top of the water, and maybe you have a fish come up and look at it, it just gives them a little different look, and it's cool. It's cool to have something different. So I like that one right there with the little flasher boo.
And so when you put that through, are you like gluing that in place or anything, or tying a knot, or it stays in then once you get it in?
Yeah, it stays in. Like, so I'll pull my hooks down, and I'll actually rotate my hooks where they're facing the opposite way. And you can change. I'll take one step back. I really wanted to learn how to do this because I had so many like legs on my frogs that were, just they get clumped together, or everybody's had it where they've maybe melted, or the skirts fall off. I'm like, man, I'm wasting all these good frogs. Like, I need to learn how to do this. And so I did. I would just basically just pull this, and this one's pretty hard to pull out. But you can get it out, and I would pull the legs off, and you really have to pinch it to where they're close together, and it's just like a solid or a straight line through. And I would, wrap some braid around, a lot of this like flasher balloon, and tie it to that little needle and just poke it through. They make a tool for this, but I didn't even really like the tool. I was like, I got to get this through somehow. So that needle, and some braid, and you can just pull it through. Um, it helps too. Like if you've ever seen like the replacement skirts on a frog, they'll come with a knot in the middle. So you like tie a knot first too. That way it doesn't just like slide through the holes. Like they come standard. If you try to pull this one out, um, it'll have like a knot on the skirt. So that helps too. But yeah, you can replace, all the skirts on your frog. It is a little bit of a pain. Like, I mean, not everybody wants to do that, but I definitely, you can put whatever color you want too. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, and I imagine if you're with the popping frog, you're probably working that maybe a little slower instead of walking. If you're letting it sit, I imagine that that's where the mylar or flashaboo or something's going to make a difference when they study it. Are you with that popping frog? Are you popping it more or walking it, or how do you work it?
Yeah, with the popping frog, I'm really, you can overwork a popping frog, and like you don't want to like be chugging it like it's you're fishing in the Amazon, after peacock bass. Um, it's really more of popping your slack right? So you can make a long cast out there or a skip, and you're just kind of just popping your slack where you're working it side to side, making a little bit more commotion than you would with a regular standard frog. And I do like a popping frog better too when there may be just a little ripple or a little bit of chop on the water. Um, I've definitely noticed times where it's made a difference um, over just your standard walking frog. But if it's like slick calm, no wind, and there's times when I'll be like, maybe I should pick up, your standard frog when it's just glass calm and there's not a ripple in the water. But a lot of times, if there's just a little bit of ripple and it's open water or scattered grass, like I'm fishing this and I'm going to work it pretty quick if I don't know if I'm around fish. But if I'm like, I know there's some fish around here, I'm really going to slow it down, both the standard frog and the popping. Like, I've growing up on Gunnersville, it used to be predominant player like in the fall and throwing a frog before everybody started throwing it, and we always worked them like really slow, like throwing them on the mats, and you see guys throwing them and popping across the mats and catch some fish that way. But we'd always just go like this. We just don't and just go real slow. So I've always worked my frogs probably slower than most people.
Yeah, that's it. The old, I mean, the old timers, they would throw it out there and you let the top water sit until all the ripples go away, which is that's hard for me. But it does seem like it's as slow as you can go. I mean, you can let them sit and they'll come up and smoke them. Are you going down? I mean, typically top waters a lot of times this time of year are like a shad spawn deal, but it sounds like this is you're going down kind of lead in banks, just more kind of open banks and lead in areas, just anywhere there be spawners, or what do you kind of look for?
Yeah, I mean, vegetation's always something I'm first going to. Like, if there's grass in a lake, I like to fish that first for sure because it's good habitat. Um, and if it's really shallow, like too, like if you know, I didn't throw it as much at last tournament, but it was a perfect kind of scenario. Where if the vegetation, let's say, is in you know a foot and a half, 2 foot or shallower, where the fish don't have a lot of room to come up, like it's short distance to the surface. A frog is a great bait around that vegetation. But if it's deeper, if it's 5 6 foot, like I'll use a different technique most of the time. So the shallower, really, the better with the frog, like on the bank, around docks, grass, shoreline cover is where I'm targeting. Trees, overhangs, shade, all those things. Like, and it's not just a morning dew. I talked about that. That's really just a feeding window. You hear the shad spawn, and that can be good. Typically, it's hard to usually get on a consistent shad spawn bite, but pay attention to those shade lines, little things like that. Like, yeah, that worked last week for me. Like, just going back to the kind of the old school basics. Like, and it was cool to do that. Like, caught some good fish. There was a shad spawn kind of going on, and I'm just saying this because this kind of relates to May too. But the shady bank I caught, I think I was the first one with a limit that day. And they all came on a shady bank, and I noticed that, like, the fish wouldn't bite in the sunny side. They would bite a swim jig, the moving baits in the shade, the little bit that there was. So those kind of things you got to really pay attention to if you're like a shallow water guy, and that's what a lot of the great shallow water anglers like. Those little things, and they may not bite a frog on that sunny side, but you go right across the creek, they may be chewing it. So it's little things just like that. But shoreline, definitely, always fish shallow in May. It doesn't matter where.
And then if they're not going on the frog, then I mean, ideally they are. You never put that down, but
Ideally,
yeah. If they're not going on the frog, what's option number two for May?
option number two. I love soft plastics in May, but I did bring just a swim jig. You know, we're talking about the shad spawn. It definitely plays like no matter where you're at. That first hour of daylight can be magical. So always a swim jig, covering water too, man. Like for me, that's always key. Just you know when you get around fish because typically they're going to be biting or you're going to see some activity in May. Like it's not the dead of winter. Whenever you get around some fish, they're going to kind of show themselves. So swim jig, you probably cover more water with a swim jig than, you know, a lot of baits. So if you're fishing shallow, it's hard to beat. Um, I've been playing around too, putting some different skirts on mine. I've never really done that until like this year, which is crazy. And I'm kind of kicking myself. I'm like, why haven't you done that? But it's worked. I mean, I've caught a lot of fish so far on the different skirts I put on. So I'm like kind of kicking myself for that. But if the frog, that's obviously one of my go tos. One tournament's on that. It's a big fish bait. I'm always gonna have it on the deck. But plastics, this is probably May transition into June. If you go down south, I would say no matter really where you're at, you're going to start seeing the bigger profile worms on everybody's deck. They're getting away from the, maybe the smaller, finessier stuff. Fish want a big bait, and that's when I'm going to feed them the big worm. It still works. It's going to catch fish. Like we got tournaments this year, May and June, and I would be willing to bet, bigger profile worms are going to be playing standard Texas rig. And if you want to get, um, a little fancy, you can do some other rigging techniques. But I'll start off with this one right here. This is probably my favorite worm ever made, all over the country. Shaky head, Neko rig, all the above, the hit worm, Magnum hit worm. Um, this is a bait like if I'm struggling hard to get a bite, like I'm gonna have this one rigged up multiple ways. And I brought a couple different uh I figured somebody could learn a little something from this, but there's different ways when you nail weight. You always hear about Neko rig, whatever you want to call it. But there's two different styles of nail weights that I'm going to throw on this. And you have one standard nail looking weight right here. It's just these are tungsten, but you can use lead. Doesn't matter. Tungsten's a little bit smaller. It's stupid expensive now, but um, I I'm going to use this one when I'm like around a grassy bottom, or if I'm throwing it maybe a little shallower. All on a spinning rod though. But if I'm, if the bottom's not like a shell bottom or rock, I'm going to go with this one. And it's not just going to fall straight down and hit the bottom fast. It's going to kind of spiral down. And for last year at Lake Fork, caught some really nice fish on this exact worm in May. Fish were garden fry. They were spawning a little deeper. Um, it was kind of tough, but for me anyways. But this was a great bait for me to catch those kind of tricky fish. But you can rig it like I said with the standard nail. But if you're fishing like groups of fish or uh, fish that are on brush piles, or you're really trying to get a worm down quick, scoping with them, you can go with like one of these that are like exposed on the worm where they're come out the bottom. So you just screw it in. That there's different brands of these, but I think this one, I don't even know what this one is. Genus maybe, but this is a 5.3 grams, so it's like a 3/16 ounce weight. So when you throw this out there with a Neko rig, it's just going to fall straight down. It's not going to spiral. The weight is on the outside of the worm, so it just shoots down like a rocket, which sometimes is good. Um, but yeah, I got two different styles. This is a little football head one. This is a little Japanese one, which is kind of cool. It just screws in. It's small, but yeah. So there's two different types of nails, two different scenarios. On the hit worm.
And are you with your Neko, or are you letting it get to the bottom and then kind of shake it in place, or are you going to drag it, or are you lifting it up again, or how do you work yours?
Yep. So always the key with really, I think the key with the Neko, um, and take a it does take some patience. And now it's different with, I would say, with active target, live scope, where you can see your bait or see if there's a fish around it. But a lot of times I'm just really just, if I'm throwing it on a fish or throwing around where I think there's some fish, I'm not going to try to move this worm like, you know, very far at a time. Like, it's probably the biggest, you know, I'm not going to say mistake, but, not pulling the worm way up off the bottom. You really want to keep the worm, like visualize the worm hitting the bottom, and then you're just really just trying to shake it along the bottom. Um, and that's just seems to be the best way to get bit. Like, there's times when if they're really pressured, like if you just barely move this worm off the bottom, like they're like, that's not real. So keeping it on the bottom is key, and really just like shaking your slack. Just kind of hitting the worm, not overly shaking at times. I do that a lot where I'm like really trying to get one to open up its mouth, and I'm just, shaking it, the flakes off of it. But keeping it on the bottom is always something that I've had better success with.
And are you a kind of like that Neko, more straight shank sort of hook, or are you like the more the
I'll tell
wacky
you
kind of round
this,
bend?
Tom, I made a huge mistake last year at Lake Fork. I lost, not kidding you, I can go back to my Instagram. I lost the biggest fish I've ever hooked in a tournament, not in a tournament. It doesn't matter. And I had this fish marked. It was on a tree. It was spawning. It was deeper. It was like 10 foot, and there was two fish there. There was a male and a female. Well, I roll up there, and the waypoint I'd made was giant. And I'm not really great with. I've never really scoped deep bed fish or anything like that. So I catch the male. And I'm like, oh my gosh! And I throw back out there, and I see this big jot just swimming around this tree, just kind of going crazy. And anyway, hooked it. Comes up once, got it. Comes up again, jumps, throws it. First fish of the morning, and another angler was close, and he's like, "How big was that one?" And I was like, "Dude, it was. I don't even know. It was. It hurt me deep. I'm still hurt about it. But I'll tell you what I did wrong, and I'll never do this again. I don't care. I, I had hooks, straight shank hooks that had a weed guard on, and I knew better, but I was throwing it in a tree. So my thinking was, we're at Lake Fork. There's a lot of trees. Like, yeah, this weed guard, like I can pull it through the trees probably better. It was probably a mistake throwing a shaky, this in there first too. But regardless, like that day, I ended up coming in, and anyway, I was telling like Cody Meyer, I think about it, and I told him like what hook I was throwing, and it was a hook with a weed guard on it, and he's like, bro, like what are you doing? And I'm like, I know, like, huge mistake there. And he's like, dude, Dudley, is best wacky worm fisherman probably of all time, said never, will never throw a weed guard. Doesn't matter where he's at, you know. Um, so yes, on the strength shank, I will never pick up a hook with a weed guard on a Neko rig or wacky rig for that. Like, it does not matter. It doesn't matter if I get snagged 100 times. Like, I'm not going to do it. So that was my lesson. And people on this watching this may love a weed guard, but I that ruined me.
Yeah, in the spring, if you ever bedfish with them, that's what kind of burns me on them. And I keep on. I learned that lesson's the same thing. But you see him in front of you, watch that fish pick it up, and he's got it all the way in his mouth, and you're like, got him, and don't got him. Like,
I know, but a straight shank, yeah, it's crazy. Like, you throw a weed guard on a jig, and you know thing's got a big old weed guard on it, and doesn't seem to matter. But I love a straight shank, like a number one. It seems to what I kind of go on one aught. Like, there's different brands all carry different size. They're all different, but a one to one aught. Um, on my wacky rig, Neko rig, I will most of the time put a band on it when I'm throwing a Neko rig, but really the max scent plastic, I think, over like just a tip of it's a different type of plastic. Um, it's soft, but it's kind of durable, so you can really get away without even a band on there. And but I do put bands on a lot of my worms. But I've kind of over the last year, I really started to try to get away from that, thinking maybe the hookup's probably a little bit better without it.
yeah, that tungsten, like you said, I'm cheap there. When you cast one of those off, that kind of hurts. It's like I'll lose a couple of fish for to not lose the tungsten, and then you regret it every time you lose a
Regret
fish.
it every time, but I didn't bring a hook with me for the Neko, but I'm always going to rig it with that straight shank, that one aught or that one. I'm going to rig it up so that hook's going to be like that coming out of the worm, just threading it in barely, and then popping it out where it's just going to be like basically just like that, where it's going to stand straight up, but it exposed. So yeah, you don't want to just like go all the way through the worm or anything like that. You just want to really just about halfway through the worm is perfect, and just have that hook point up.
Yeah, I know you got a couple other worm rigs there too, but real quick, going back to you just touched on, you said swim jigs. You really got into changing skirts. I'm just curious, are you trying to get just your own concoctions of really crazy skirt colors, or fuller ones, or what's your why have you
Man,
gotten into that?
I'll tell you this. Like, I think my main reason is just better action out of it. Really, it's really hard for companies to wire tie skirts on jigs, just because you can't mass produce jigs, and it's harder. It takes more time. So I would say probably 90% of jig companies probably don't do it. Maybe less than that, but there's a lot of some smaller companies that probably do. But like this one, like this Berkeley one, like I love the hook on it. I love the style, everything like that. But tying a skirt, number one, you're not, a fish can grab it, pull it, yank on it, and my thinking, you hear guys talk about it, but like just the efficiency of fishing tournaments, like I may only have 3 hours to fish if I'm running a long ways or locking. So let's say a fish pulls my skirt down. Well, I'm gonna have to get another bait out. I'm gonna have to retie. Yeah, that may not sound like a lot, but that's part of it there. And I've never really been that efficient of an angler overall. Like, I've wasting time doing this or doing that. So I'm trying to get better at that. But I think just the overall action um, of just like wire tying is just way better. Like, I kind of kicked myself for not doing this before. But I just kind of one day I'm like, man, that I think I could make a better skirt, better, maybe a couple different colors. So I've been playing with that a lot lately. And like this one, on a standard jig, you're going to have, the top, um, when they put a collar on, it's going to have like a top layer and a bottom layer. And so this one I just tied basically with just the top layer. So, if you roll it over, there's nothing there. So it really kind of flares it out. And I don't know. I think it can, you just see just how it's dancing a little bit
Hmm.
like that. Like it just looks better in the water. And not all fish are going to bite this. Like, you know, if a bunch of guys are throwing swim jigs, like not every fish is just going to come race up and just smoke a swim jig. Like, you got to really be fishing it correctly and all the above. But I just think the overall action and efficiency of it, like you could catch 100 fish on this one skirt, and you can put a couple different colors in there if you want to. It just looks good.
Yeah, and if you travel with that too, I imagine. I mean, there's nothing worse than you get on whatever color, and all of a sudden it's like the last of that color, and then you go hunting every tackle store in the area when you're like, dude, if I just had skirts, I could just put it on my
And,
other 15.
and that's how I've always been. Like I don't know why, but it's never too late to learn in fishing. That's what I love about it. I love to learn new things, like just like this, or putting eyes on guides. I mean, guides on rods. Like I did that this past year, and like skirts on the frogs. Like I've been fishing professionally now for 10 or 11 years now, and I'm looking back on all the tournaments. Like, man, like you could have, you could have had a better hook, or better skirt. Like so, but I'm learning, and it's good stuff. Like I love that about fishing too. Like it's just never, you're just never out of options to learn something.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. And then you had a couple other look like a couple other worm rigs there too.
Yeah, yeah. Really down there at one of the last tournaments, like I won several of those May tournaments in on Toho, out of all places. But I was talking about the Neko, the standard straight worm, and this is a finessier type deal. Like if I'm fishing a brush pile, or a school of fish, like this may not be my first, may throw crankbait, swim bait, whatever. But a 10-inch power worm, it's been around for a long time. But Texas rigging this, like I'm gonna have this on in the middle of the summer, always, like down south, June, going into July. July is probably the best big worm month for me. Um, your standard Texas rig, 3/8 quarter. You can put it on a mag shaky head. You don't want to go too heavy on those. There's a lot of heavy ones of those, but I like just really just your standard, your Texas rig, pulling it through brush. Um, and even a Carolina rig too. But yeah, when I won that fishing offshore, I was catching a lot of my fish, most of my fish on this. So yeah, a big worm's always gonna be a great choice. I very rarely get away from plum. Has to be my go-to blue fleck plum. But yeah, it's kind of the month of the big worm. You don't really see a big worm playing from January to then like May. Then you'll start all the tournament, you know, and I think they just love that big profile. You just can't even go big enough. Like I'll go up to the 12 inch at times if I'm really around some big fish, like going to Sandpea Cooper, I know what lives in there. Like I will have some 12. I may even try to find some 15-inch worms. I don't know. Um, last time we had a tournament on Wheeler, I remember I forgot who it was, but he was throwing like and he did pretty good, but he was throwing like a 16 or 17-inch worm. But I'm like, I didn't even know, you know, I didn't even have any. I was kind of like, man, I didn't even have the bait that he was catching them on. But yeah, ginormous worm on Tennessee River, like way bigger than what I forgot who made it, but it's a 16, 17, or 18-inch worm, and that was in June. So it's always going to play if they're out a little deeper, brush, big fish. It's pretty standard, but it's good to know. I don't really. That's really the only time I'll throw it. Like once even into August, but after that, it's like a 3 month window for me with the giant worm. And another one that I throw, it's kind of a sneaky one. And if you're not on a place with 7, 8 pounders and you don't want that, you know, huge profile, this one right here, I've caught a lot of fish on this one too. Texas rigging, if it's the kingtail, it's a max scent version. So it's just a different plastic. It's got that good scent in it. It was kind of cool in that tournament at Toho. That heavy hitter is like I can almost rotate between this one and that one and pick up fish. I don't know why, but I caught a lot of fish on that kingtail, out of brush piles and stuff like that. And the last but not least, this is a new worm for Berkeley, and I've had these for quite a while. And this kind of goes back to the Neko. If you're looking for a different profile, um, this guy right here is pretty money. Um, it's just a giant, straight tail. This is a came from the Japanese market, and I think like Dewa, I'm guessing probably was kind of originator of this, but it's a 9 inch, just a straight tail. And it's got that scent in it. So if you're looking for a different kind of worm, like the hit worm, I'll just put a comparison. But you can rig this one. It's perfect for a Neko because there's no like curly tail in it or anything like that. But there's the hit worm and here's the power wag. So definitely a difference there. And it's thick. It weighs a lot just on its own. Like you could chunk this weightless almost on a ledge, but if you add a little weight in it, um, it's just definitely a different profile.
Are you still throwing that on a spinning rod, or you put that on a bait caster?
I will throw this one on a bait caster. If I'm throwing it on a Neko rig, which probably I'm going to a lot of times with this, I'm just going to stick a little nail in there, and definitely I'll probably have an O-ring on this one just because it's so big. But yeah, you can throw this on a bait caster. I remember Ayler back in the day whack them on, bigger nail weight, throwing it on a bait caster. So yeah, you're basically throwing a 10-inch worm on a bait caster. Just a different, and you can rig it straight tail, Texas rig standard, but just a different profile.
Yeah, and it seems like with those worms, in the spring we spend all our time trying to get all these subtle little differences, and do you want the flat-sided crankbait or the round the rolling one or whatever, and then it seems like in the summertime it's just like a worm. You go out there and you were talking about rotating with two different you know ribbon tail worms, but basically it's more getting around them and just
Yeah. Yeah, it's
working them.
getting around the route structure, like, whether it's brush, like you kind of got to decipher on whatever lake you're fishing and how to find it. But the hard part's finding them, like, you're going to spend hours and hours and hours if you're going to throw these baits to find the fish. Like, but those fish may not they're not going to bite this, they're not going to bite a lot of different baits once you actually do find them. So you got to go show them something different or a little bit different because they've probably been fished for. Like anytime I find fish offshore now, like it's very rare that I pull up to a spot. I'm like, these haven't been fished for. Like they have been fished for. Um, and because you throw in there typically, and you don't get bit, no matter what it is, like you don't get bit immediately. So yeah, you're right. The hard part is finding them always doesn't matter. It's not always about like shapes and sizes, but it does help. Like once you do find them to maybe trigger a big fish. Um, so yeah, I mean, you're kind of seeing that now with all the JDM baits. Like you can't just go throw, a minnow at those fish anymore and catch that kind of weight. Like they're seeing the fish, but they're throwing different stuff and it's like triggering those fish. So it's kind of the same thing with this. Like, but the old school stuff, I'm sitting here, this is all traditional baits that I've shown you. And like this all still works really good. And it's going to continue to work really good. Like there's never going to, in my opinion, I may be wrong, Tom, but I don't think there's ever going to be a better bait than just a worm. Like it just, whether you're wacky rigging it, talking about the nail weight stuff, but it just catches fish always. Like it's not a bait that goes in and out of time, like a crazy looking, spider or whatever. That's working really good right now. But a worm, Texas rig, Neko rig, whatever you want to rig it, like it's always going to work.
Yeah, yeah, it's probably those worms have caught as many baits as all of their bass baits combined over the years. And you're talking about those offshore fish and ones haven't been messed with. And I've been trying to wrap my head around lately. You think about back in the day, Fritz was kind of the first guy to go offshore. He was a master of it. A lot of those lakes, I'm sure hardly anybody was even fishing out there. And those are untapped fish. And what he was so good at was he would get out there and then he would just cast on them and cast on them and cast on them. And all of a sudden he triggered them and it might be a half hour and then all of a sudden he fired the school and then he would just go to hammering them. And that's when they had never seen baits before. And now we go out there and it's when you have scope and you see them in one cast, you don't get them to go. We're just like, well, I guess you can't catch them and move on. And that worm, I don't know what it is about there. You just throw it out there and eventually they just decide to eat, or a shad comes in, or the sun goes
Yeah.
behind a cloud. I just don't understand it.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, yeah, it's just one of those baits that if you're just really struggling to get bit, like, and it's the middle of summer, you just kind of stick with it. But kind of going back to the middle of summer, like, and I didn't bring my whole tackle box to the kitchen table because that's what you're throwing. And a lot of times for me, May, June, like you can have all the shallow stuff out and you can have all the deep stuff. And what's not cool, but what's different now is like 2026 compared to 2016. So 10 years. I've fished a lot in 10 years. But 2016, it was like summertime. I'm going out there, you know, out there in the middle of the lake. I'm graphing no matter where I'm at all day. I'm going to find a lot of fish. They're going to be big. They're going to be schooled up. Now, everybody's still doing that. Everybody's going out doing that. But there's way more people, like triple, quadruple the people that are out there. And man, like this summer, I'll tell you this, like it was 90-degree water and I was on Gunnersville and, hot. I mean, it was probably July. Um, and I just didn't want to do it. Like I didn't want to go out there and graph and look for fish. I'm going to fish, really shallow and caught some really big fish just, up on the bank around docks, um, places that nobody wants to fish, like it's not maybe the cool thing to do. So that's something for those of y'all that are watching, like, I've talked about all these worms and we have talked a little bit about offshore fishing, but never overlook nowadays. And I know it's Gunnersville and there's a lot of fish in there, but I'm not going to overlook the shallow bite, like going into the summer. in my big tournaments, or call them big tournaments. In the tournaments I'm fishing, I'm not going to overlook that because there's not going to be anybody up there, and there's going to be a big wad of fish sitting under a dock or in a grass bed. No, but they could be big fish, and so that's something to keep in mind.
And you're in an interesting part of the world there in kind of the middle of Alabama where you spent so much time and you can run to. You've got Gunnersville, like you talked about a lot, shallower, grassy. It's got some offshore ledges.
Yeah,
You have stuff like Wheeler there. That's I think these days no grass out there, just more barren and open. But there's shallow cover, and then you have something like Smith Lake, Lewis Smith, that's deep, clear, a lot of spotted bass, a lot of rock and stuff. How how's your approach vary on those three in the
and
summertime?
speaking of Smith Lake, I'm glad you said that because when I showed up, we had a lead tournament there. It was 2 years ago. It was in June, and I fished. That's how deep I fished for most of the tournament. Everybody was out in the middle, um, which was the great game plan. Um, but that shows. I mean, that's kind of how what angler. I felt like my chances going into that tournament, like if I was going to catch a big bag of fish, at least one day or multiple days in a row, it was going to be on the bank, where nobody was at, and had some opportunities to do better than I did. But that's the kind of the risk you run when you're shallow, summertime. Like I've never had fish their mouths in the really hot water. They get super soft. Like I I hadn't really experienced that as much fishing like summertime, super shallow, but they can be hard to land. And I heard a lot of guys complaining about that. They were doing the same thing I was doing, but yeah, Smith Lake, like I was on the bank, I was fishing wolf pack fish and just fish that were up there cruising, looking for bluegill, a little bit bigger largemouth, and there was fish up there to be caught. And in a single day tournament, like Hunter was leading the first day, and he was doing the same thing. So like in a single day tournament, you can win a tournament on the bank. And so a lot of tournaments around the country, are one day tournaments, and Saturdays. A lot of y'all are watching like most of the time you're not fishing a multi-day tournament. So, that's on, Smith Lake where it's super clear. Everybody thinks spotted bass, but typically something that everybody's not doing is a lot of times where the bigger fish. But Wheeler Gunnersville is kind of the same way. You can go out there and play the offshore game and catch fish and find, but you're gonna have boats around you. So my mindset's like you need kind of both, or um just a solid game plan to really be successful in a tournament.
And talk about the Wolfpack just a little bit. I grew up in the upper Midwest, and when I came down south and started fishing regional tournaments and going around, all of a sudden I heard about these wolf packs, and you see like these groups of fish. I'm like, I've never seen this before. This is kind of a neat thing, but I mean, it's
It's
kind of
it's
neat.
cool.
It's super neat, but it can also be like really frustrating in a hurry too. Talk a little bit about the wolf pack.
Yeah, I'm not a super. I haven't done the whole Wolfpack game. Like I remember watching the tournaments, the Forcewood Cups. That's when it became like, whoa, this is really cool. And you probably fished some of them, but um, where they were like Watchtaw and Lanier and the Fisher, you know, in these wolf packs of 5, 10 fish swimming down the bank, just swimming as fast as they can, looking for bluegill. And it was pretty cool at Smith. It was like the third. I made the third day cut, and I ran to the other end of the lake where I hadn't been fishing. I went up to White Oak, and I run up there, and I'm just going down the bank, and I'm throwing a little popper and a prop bait, and just covering a ton of water, like that's the biggest key was covered water. And I just felt like I could catch a big largemouth or two or three doing that. And I remember hooking one, and it's like under a shade line or a tree, and then fighting it back in the boat. And like I see like four or five with it, and I'm like, oh gosh, and I get it in, I'm measuring it, and it was like maybe a keeper. And I put them in the well, and I stand back up, and I'm trolling down the bank. I'm like, I know I saw some, like I don't know where they went. And all of a sudden, I see them, and there were like 10 of them, like way more than I would have thought. And um, they just swam down the bank. I chased them for probably, it had to be half the creek. And they were just literally, all they were doing, and I hadn't really seen this before, but is like they were just swimming just steady, like fast swim. And all of them were probably a foot off the bank, maybe. And yeah, just cruising, just fast as they could. And you could throw something right in front of them, and I mean, I threw, wacky rig. I'm trolling down the bank on high, picking up different rods, you know, like throwing, like grabbing something. I'm like, they got to bite something. And I think I ended up catching maybe one more, but they just didn't really like, it was that first initial, come up and react type deal on that wolf pack. But I'm sure on other lakes you could sit there and probably whack them. But man, I know it's a great way to catch big fish in the summertime. It's just you have to cover a tremendous amount of water to find them, and really be a kind of know what creeks to go in, because I covered so many creeks. Looking, it was that same tournament Steve Kenny was throwing the glide bait. I was pretty much doing the same thing, and but yeah, it can be a feast or famine type deal in the summer.
Sure. And then with the like we're talking about the South here, but it's fun. May, June, July. Half the country's saying it's like the heart of the spawn, and it's I mean those fish are going bonkers. You get to go to Champlain or Cayuga or something like that in May, June. It's I mean it's full throttle up there, and I think you've done pretty well that time of year up there too.
Yeah, it's a different ball game. Like once our tournaments start going north, or if y'all fish in the north, like down south, it gets tough. I mean, middle of summer, like you can still have some good days, but overall, fishing's pretty tough. Like you're not going out there, and unless you're on a great lake, like you're not just hammering fish all day. But you're right, you're going up to Champlain or different the various lakes up north, like the top water walking bait. I took a fun trip up there to Champlain a couple years ago, and first week of July, and that may be the best topwater fishing in the United States. I'm sure it isn't, but it's the best I've seen. Um, it really doesn't get better with smallmouth on top. But yeah, like it's just different. You go up north, it changes completely. Like you can throw a lot of this out the window when you go to smallmouth land. This is really talking for maybe except the frog. I always keep the frog on, but yeah, it's good as it gets.
Yeah, yeah, and the largemouth up there are pretty fun too. I think didn't you have a Cayuga tournament years ago catching
I
them
did.
pretty good? Yeah.
Yeah, I was catching them on a drop shot, and my brother kind of dialed me in on the pattern in practice. Um, it was in June. It was in June on Cayuga, and um, I was catching some smallmouth off beds, and it was just like a perfect storm. And I didn't win the tournament, so it wasn't perfect. Kevin won it, and you know, but I was close, and I had the right recipe. But I caught all my smallmouth, and I went to where I just got a few bites in practice, and I remember the wind was blowing really hard. What slipped off the tournament, and Coyote was really clear, very visual lake, and I could see these holes in the grass, and I'm like, man, those look like maybe beds, but they're really deep. And started pitching a drop shot over in them, and just started just hammering them and catching some big quality fish. But yeah, a drop shot, it's always, that's always a player. Like it's one of those baits I'm going to have on my deck in that clear water too. But yeah, that it's fun to go up there and mix it up.
Yeah, yeah. Especially that first half of summer is fun down south, but it gets to be a grind after that. It's time to head north.
Yeah,
Yeah. All right. Well, that's some great stuff for the early part of summer. Appreciate you sharing some of that. For folks who want to follow along on social media, and I will say you're one of my favorite follows on social. It's always some there's some good fish catches, but a lot of laughs on there too. It's pretty fun stuff. So where do people find
appreciate
it,
it.
Jordan Lee?
Yep, it's J Lee Fishing. You can find me on there. Yeah, I post more probably on Instagram and Facebook, and try to share some funny stuff every now and then. Um, One other tip I got for you before you let me go. We're talking about the frogs, and I had this one here, and I'm like, oh man, I didn't show it yet. But for those of y'all stuck around, this is a cool one to keep in your back pocket. And I actually had an Elite Series angler tell me that I think it was Kyle Norsetter. We're at the Mississippi River last year, and he sent me a picture of the frog that I posted about, that I caught some fish on, and he caught like a pretty good fish on it. So he took a tip and put it on me, one of my own tricks, and put it on me. But if you're around that thick grass, and this is something I did at Kissimmee, and it's just does it always matter? No, I mean, but it's just something to keep in mind and play with, like putting the rattles in the back of your frogs. If you're in like some really thick stuff, um, I take the skirt out just like I showed you on the flash review, and I put that in there. But instead, I'll just pull everything out, and I put these jig rattles in there, and I actually caught some big fish in that Toho tournament that I won on the frog. I was just trying everything, get that one more bite. And I pulled out the old trick, the Gunnersville OG trick with the rattles and the tails. And um, something I'm gonna experiment more with the rattles on different baits, probably going forward, because I saw Jason Christie last week with the swim jig. He had rattles attached to his trailer. Um, so it can matter. So just something to keep in mind. I'm gonna kind of start playing with that more. I'm gonna leave you with that last tip.
Are those joined, or are they just separately like glued in or
They're
something?
just separated, and you get some super glue, and you can just poke them in there, and they stay in there really good. But if you're, and it floats just fine. But if you're like over some really thick stuff, where you really want to make some more noise, you can put rattles like in a frog. But there's something about that jig rattle hitting that, you're moving it, like it can really call some fish up. So just something else that I played with, and it won a tournament. So I'm going to play with the rattles more with some different baits.
Sounds like it. Well, worth experimenting. Like you said, they've seen a lot of baits by the end of summer, so good to play around
Yeah,
with it.
yeah,
Well, well, really appreciate you coming in. I know it's the heart of the season, and you get ready to head on out for some more catching. So appreciate you taking the time and sharing the tips.
yeah, man. Thanks for having me. Enjoyed it as always.
All right, thanks, Jordan.